That's what we understood as sort of true cinema, is this notion of a collective sitting in a dark, theater together, experiencing a story all at the same time. Some of those videos where the audiences are just, it sounds like a rock concert. And you go, wow, this was really something special to be part of. Captain America, Winter Soldier.
The Iron Man movie made a huge impression on Joe and I when we saw it. So we were big fans of what they were doing at the time. And we began a series of meetings with them. I guess it stretched over 2 months. We would come back with a more and more specific vision of what we would do with the next Captain America movie. We felt like we had a narrative excuse because Cap had gone away frozen in the ice for 70 years to look at him as a new character, as a different person when he came out, because his entire context was changed. So the character himself has to change. And we began pitching a more textured, harder version of the character. We were more fans of where that character had gone in the comics in the 70s as opposed to the Golden Age, which the first Captain America movie, the first Avenger, is kind of a love letter to that Golden Age. So we began pitching the sort of 70s deconstructionist version of what Captain America is, a character who just wants to serve his country. How do you put that character in a place where he has to basically do the opposite of that?
For as long as I can remember, I just wanted to do what was right. I guess I'm not quite sure what that is anymore.
When we started making movies in Cleveland, we were making them for basically no budget. It was just, we were just driven by our passion and our just will to try to create something. When you're making it especially at that time before the internet, there was no, when you were in a place like that where you're a million miles away from Hollywood, you're not really feeling any connection to like where you can go with movie making. Some of the same locations where we had shot this no budget movie. If you remember the sequence on the overpass in Winter Soldier, where the Winter Soldier attacks the car carrying Captain America and Black Widow and Falcon. That location was right above a location where we had shot our very first movie. At that day when we were shooting, we had 1,000 people on set. We had 2 crews running. We had a major freeway shut down right in the center of the city. It was like the two things couldn't have been more opposite. And that was very resonant, I think, for us. Captain America, Civil War.
What do we do, Cap?
We fight.
This is gonna end well.
The way we looked at those comics, having been comic collectors, was we're not interested in telling an adaptation of the book. That book was created at a moment in time. This is a different moment in time. The thematics might not be the same. It might not have the same resonance. It may not work with the pre-existing story that, that we're working with in the Marvel universe. And so what's valuable for us is to identify which characters are critical in this new mosaic that we're creating and what elements are going to be critical to that. And, for us, I think it was, this idea that, and I think it was critical to Civil War, was that the fight was going to be over Bucky and truth. The fact that, Cap in Winter Soldier stood at a monitor and seen in fair proximity a photo of Bucky and a photo of Tony's dead parents. And the retrofitted concept was that Bucky was actually responsible for that. It was the implication at the time, although we didn't know whether we wanted to push it that far. But once we decided to make Civil War, we said, let's solidify that. What if footage existed of Bucky murdering Tony's parents? And what if Tony saw that footage? And what if Tony saw that footage in front of Cap? What would happen?
Did you know? I didn't know it was him.
That was really the essential idea that everything else in that movie was driving towards. Is how do we put them on opposite sides, and then how do we create a crisis moment for the two of them around this very personal revelation?
That came out of a process of us spending months and months in a room together, basically telling each other stories, pitching each other ideas about where this world can go and where we can take these characters. So it was a very exhaustive process, sort of exploring all the possibilities.
There's a lot of stuff that actually got cut out of that airport sequence. So, you know, when you're working on a set piece of that scale with that many characters, it's usually iterative. There's usually a process of trial and error where you'll shoot stuff, watch it cut together, didn't get it, let's go back, or we have a better idea, let's go execute this better idea. What's nice about working with Marvel is that you have very deep resources at your disposal, so you can go back. And Anth and I are relentless and exhaustive in our pursuit of telling the best story possible. When we're making a movie like that, we're probably shooting 12, 13-hour days and editing 4 or 5 hours at night and, you know, sleeping very, very little. And so our process does involve, you know, revisiting the material in chunks while we're shooting it and seeing if we can improve upon it, or to see if a certain story element is popping over another story element. And then we'll accentuate that. And, you know, we'll call Marcus and McFeely and say, come sit in the edit room, let's look at this together, and then talk about what else we could do to enhance the storytelling. So that's why something like that takes 50 days. Had we had a clear plan from the beginning, maybe it would have been, you know, 25 days. But our process is more organic than that. And there's so many elements that you're working with. There's previs coming in, there's storyboard artists, there's ideas coming from everywhere. And, you know, Anth and I are sort of commandeering the ship and trying to source out what we think are the most interesting ideas. And sometimes those ideas have to be tied together with a new narrative.
And I think one reason why it may have taken so long and why we may have had to leave some of it on the cutting room floor is that it was very important to us to approach that sequence from every single character's point of view. You know, we didn't want to take anybody for granted in that moment. Everybody had the reason for being there. Everyone had a crisis to deal with that had an emotional component for them.
I guess that's the signal.
Way to go, Tic Tac!
We spent a lot of time just chasing down the sequence from every single character's point of view and filling it out.
Avengers Infinity War.
I don't feel so good.
You're all right.
I don't know what's happening. I don't know. Hurry. I don't want to go. I don't want to go, sir. Please. Please, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. Sorry.
Can you talk a little bit about the juggling act of working on both of those films simultaneously?
Well, it's not good for your health, that's for sure. It was difficult. I remember all of us at the end said, oh, we'll never shoot 2 movies like that back to back ever again. It's really difficult and challenging, but look at the process that Joe was describing where we like to constantly be revising. It really did allow for a big interplay between what we were doing in the 2 movies and for us to be moving back and forth creatively. And I think that was a huge, very unique creative sort of opportunity that you don't have often in storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, the Star-Lord Thor stuff was really a product of improvisation on set.
How do I open this thing? Is there some sort of 4-digit code, maybe a birth date?
What are you doing?
Taking your pod. No, you're not. You will not be taking our pod today, sir.
Well, are you making your voice deeper?
No.
You are. You're imitating the God-Man. It's weird.
No, I'm not.
And really that was, you know, riding a giant bucking bronco for 3 years, those 2 movies, because we were constantly trying to stay on top of all the different story elements at all times. Well, if we pull this thread, then in this movie over here, we have to pull that thread. And so it was a very delicate calibration. Really unique experience from a storytelling standpoint, from a filmmaking standpoint, and one that we really cherished, but as Anth said, certainly took a very physical toll. Arrested Development.
Okay, guys, they are going to keep Dad in prison at least until this gets all sorted out. Also, the attorney said that they're going to have to put a halt on the company's expense account. Interesting. I would have expected that after they're keeping Dad in jail.
We were young independent filmmakers at the time. We had only made 2 independent movies. One was a micro budget, and the other was a very low budget that, did abysmally at the box office. Welcome to Collinwood. I think it made $300,000. Prior to Collinwood's failure at the box office, we had gotten a phone call to work on a show called Lucky at FX, and this was at the time where a lot of indie filmmakers from the 1990s were transitioning into television because television is adopting a similar style, energy, experimentation, and storytelling. The advent of The Sopranos and HBO. So it was really becoming an interesting place to work. It was a high, broad comedy that was also very tragic and very dark, starring John Corbett as a gambler who had won the World Series of Poker, lost all the money. His wife had committed suicide or died of a drug overdose. And the end of the pilot has him giving his wife's ring back to her parents and apologizing for her death. So really, really intense comedy. And that became an industry favorite, that comedy. It didn't last long on the air. I think the tone was, too crazy. Ron Howard was a big fan of it. And so we got a phone call from Ron saying, listen, I really like what you guys did. I think that reality TV is going to kill narrative television because, you can move so quickly with a camera. They can tell stories. They don't cost a lot to make. And it's really expensive to make single camera comedies. And, we don't want to do a sitcom. So what do? Can we go guerrilla with it? And Anthony and I loved a movie called Man Bites Dog that had won a few years earlier. Documentary team following around a serial killer, and then the documentary team actually gets pulled into these murders with the serial killer. It's a very twisted comedy, but it was shot extremely verite, and we love the style of it. And we said, well, look, we think we can use this as inspiration to make a show at a cheaper budget that, has 30, 35 location changes over the course of 5-6 days of shooting, which was unheard of at the time for television. It was very expensive to do that. Dogma was also happening at the time, and part of the Dogma filmmakers were, they would write a list of, demands of their cast. There were no trailers. You do your own makeup. Well, we wrote something very similar to that and gave it to the actors on Arrested Development. So we proceeded to execute that pilot using digital cameras like a reality show, shot mockumentary style.
Yeah, it was the first primetime scripted show shot on digital video, not shot on film. That was all a part of the effort that Joe and I were bringing to it, that guerrilla energy that, Ron Howard was looking for in terms of to shake things up, with the idea that reality TV was kind of eating the dial up in terms of how much it was expanding because it was so cheap to make and so watchable. And so we developed this attitude of, well, if you can't beat them, join them. And I think part of the reason why it works so well is that because the show is completely absurdist, but to apply a very grounded verite realism to documentary realism to it felt pretty weird.
Tobias, now believing the boat party to be pirate-themed,
Well, you look like a pirate.
began searching through his wife's luggage for an outfit.
I should say so. Look at the blouse, sir.
Then, mistaking a group of garishly dressed men for pirates, Tobias boarded a van full of homosexuals. Soon, he was unwittingly part of a protest against the local yacht club.
How are you? Oh my God, I have the exact same blouse.
We were doing one-light setups. We had 3 cameras all running at the same time. We had operators filming each other at moments. Remember, we got a phone call from the head of the studio at the time on day 2 or 3, and she'd been watching the dailies. And the phone call basically started with, what the are you two doing? I'm watching dailies, and I'm watching cameramen film each other. And we're trying to explain.
Never cut together. Yeah.
Listen, that was another thing that was said to us, is that the show would never cut together. We said, listen, we're just grabbing pieces. We're grabbing moments, Of course they're going to shoot each other because we're trying to move really quickly here. We're cross-shooting. So rather than pan through operators, pan through lights, we said, but it's all part of the tone and feel and look of the show. And we did cut it together, and it did win an Emmy. And we didn't thank that executive at the Emmys, I think.
No, I don't think so. Community.
What is community college? Well, you've heard all kinds of things. You've heard it's loser college for remedial teens, 20-something dropouts, middle-aged divorcees, and old people keeping their minds active as they circle the drain of eternity. That's what you heard. However, I wish you luck! Okay, there's more to this speech. There's actually a middle card that is missing. Can we all look around our immediate areas?
Having won the Emmy for Arrested Development, we're in this position in television where we could night shows when people would call us and say, hey, will you do this? And basically the show would get picked up if we got involved with the show. We got 10 shows picked up over 11 years. We were working at real, volume and, operating as high-level producers and directors on everything that we were working on. We got asked to come in and meet with Dan about a script. We read it. We loved it. We went and sat with him. One of the great stories about what really convinced us that Harmon was the right guy to work with is that we were sitting in a room. It was me and you and one of the other producers on the show, and Dan was at the keyboard. And I don't think we've ever told this story. But, this is typically the way Anthony and I like to work, is whether we're writing or not writing, we're still in the room, workshopping a script. It's really important to us that we get our directorial thoughts out into the script. The script is king for us. So we're doing a process like that with Dan Harmon a couple weeks before we shot the pilot. And one of the other producers was in there. Dan and this other producer were a little bit like oil and water. And the producer had said something, I think, that upset Dan about the script. And Dan ended up tearing the shirt off of his body.
He's just growling.
2 a.m.
Right,
and I remember looking at you going, we found our guy. Yeah. This guy is f***ing passionate. I mean, there's probably 100 stories like that.
Yeah.
Somebody will write a book one day about it.
You chloroformed the janitor? Stop yelling at me! You're the ones that got caught! You're the one who's yelling! We're in big trouble! We have to do something! No, I don't know what to do! My whole brain is crying! Guys! Hey, I have an idea. Okay, it may sound a little weird, but trust me.
So when we started working television, the format became predictive fairly quickly. And you're like, well, what are we going to do with 24 of these stories, right? It's like basically the same story every week. But we sat down with Dan and discussed, like, what happens to the show from here? Well, what if we started applying genre on a weekly basis to the show to make it fresh? Because otherwise this is just going to turn into a will they, won't they kind of, Annie Jeff story from here, and what do we do with that after one season? I think it's almost too was Dan's frustration with having to write that story. He was like, this is too predictive. And so we started experimenting with genre, which is great for us because we were pop culture junkies growing up, and this was a really interesting playground. It was a fun sandbox for us to play in. Action was always a critical part of our diet. When we got the opportunity to do the paintball episodes, a good friend of mine, Justin Lin, came in to do the first one, who was working on the Fast and Furious franchises. He and I had gone to film school together, been in the same class. So we asked him to come in and do the first of those.
You suck.
And then Anthony and I did the second series of those. It was a 2-parter.
This is paintball.
One was a spoof on Leone, which was a favorite filmmaker of ours growing up, and the other was a spoof on Star Wars.
Fall back to reference position. I need help.
I had a dream it would end this way.
Kevin, who was a similar pop culture junkie, was feeding off of that energy from Community, this different genre, a weak concept. And then when he got to those episodes, obviously Star Wars being so important to him, I think he adored those two, the back-to-back paintball episodes. And he reached out and asked us if we had any interest in comic books, and we did, and now we're here.
Avengers Endgame.
Tony, I don't know.
Why? He made it for you. Plus, honestly, I have to get out of the garage before Morgan takes it sledding.
Thank you, Tony.
Will you keep that a little quiet? Didn't bring one for the whole team. We are getting the whole team. Yeah?
We're working on that right now.
There was a lot of pressure, but, again, the thing that we could always default to, which helped us move through any ideas of outside pressure, was just ourselves. We were huge fans ourselves. We just kept focused on how do we surprise ourselves? How do we challenge ourselves? And how do we find the most satisfying version of the story for ourselves? Because it's just too complicated when you start to think about the complexity of all the different fans, all the different expectations. There's so many directions you can go in that storytelling, infinite possibility. We just really had to use our own inner sort of meter to sort of find our way through it.
It really was like diving off of like a a 12-story building into a cup of water. It's not easy to please a wide-ranging, highly opinionated, diverse group of people who all want something different from the story. You're always going to piss somebody off. We learned very early on that, the fans were always going to be contradictory. Look, we poured our heart and souls into those movies because we wanted to pass along the feelings that we had watching large-scale movies as children in theaters to other kids.
No, give me that. You have the little one.
The goal for us was to make sure that, a new generation could walk out of those theaters and have lifetime memories from being there, watching it with their family or their friends, and having a true theatrical experience, at 2 a.m. in New Jersey.
We fell in love with movies as fans, not as filmmakers. To be able to activate that level of interest and excitement and joy.
We sat in a few of those theaters and, brought tears to our eyes that people were, waiting in line for hours, going to see it in the middle of the night, seeing it over and over and over again. And it doesn't matter where you come from or who you are, you're all having a similar experience, and it sort of lets you forget all the sort of manufactured divisiveness that's in the world today.
The Gray Man. We had the pleasure of working with Chris Evans for 4 movies with the Captain America character. And it was an amazing experience. I have so much respect for how he was able to embody that character, what he was able to do with that character, the partnership that Joe and I had with him in terms of evolving that character and bringing that character on an amazing journey. That was a really rare and special experience that we had with Chris. And during that period, we naturally started thinking about other things that we can do with him. That Captain America character is so specific. It's a very difficult character to play, and Chris does it masterfully. But he has an immense range as an actor. So I think we really wanted to find something for him that allowed him to use different colors. And certainly Lloyd Hansen, his character in The Gray Man, is about as far as you could possibly get from Captain America.
You must be Lloyd. What gave it away? The white pants, the trash stash. It leans Lloyd.
For as controlled and understated and selfless as Captain America is, Lloyd Hansen is the biggest, loudest, ego-driven sociopath you can come across. So Chris had a lot to play with. He had a really different process to go through in terms of who that character could be. But I would say from our end, we had the same thrill collaborating with Chris on that character and figuring out what we could do with him and where we could take it.
6 is an odd name.
Yeah. Just 007 was taken. So
6, his character, gives part of himself to help others, to help the community. There's a character who, has been a victim of the corrupt patriarchy. His father was an abuser, a physical abuser, mental abuser, and the CIA abused him the way that his father did. So he's someone who's never known his own freedom, but he still gives of himself. He still aspires to do the right thing, where Lloyd is someone who's entitled, who's been given everything, and he aspires to do the wrong thing. And so it's a very simple story about those 2 characters and those 2 ideals.
There are insane drone shots. What were some of the more difficult things that you managed to pull off?
I mean, certainly the insane drone shots that you mentioned are one of our favorite things that we were able to do in the movie. Joe and I love to explore new technology and figure out how we can sort of create new feelings, movements, textures, shots, effects through the use of new technology. And that drone is known as a speed drone, hasn't been used too much at this point, but it moves at insane speeds. It almost looks impossible to actually operate, but it somehow works. And we were able to create a certain sense of energy and movement that was very exciting to us visually and emotionally. That was certainly one of the things that we got really excited about.
Some techniques used on the VFX front that are cutting edge. There's a face capture that we're using now that we can replace actors' photoreal onto stunt players' bodies if we're doing a dangerous stunt, using digital doubles that are captured in a volume, using the real actor to do it. Obviously, we can't safely have an actor or a stunt player get sucked out of a plane at 10,000 feet as the plane is exploding. So there's certain, elements that, we wanted to pull out of our imagination in the most photoreal way possible. And there's a lot of new techniques out there that allowed us to do that.